as you can see, this is a bit different because there's two of us, we work as colleagues, and we're going to start side by side, but then in a little bit, I will continue and then Eve will step in after I've shared about work I do with Compass Rose. And just to say that we'd like to start with a poem that we feel gives a picture of the work that we're doing, in the sense of this essential work in regulating through rhythm, pendulation and breathing, especially for families who are in distress or experiencing traumatic situations. So if we could please have the poem. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead, here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes, and opens and closes. If it were always a fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding. The two are beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. Thank you. So I am Caroline, and I work as an integrative counsellor with a background in eurythmy therapy and teaching.
And hello, I'm Eve, and I'm also a eurythmy therapist and have many long years as a remedial teacher. So Compass Rose evolved out of our own experiences as parents and therapists and teachers. Finding that the needs of the children are not always being adequately met, and especially where trauma is involved, because that's an invisible thing and shows up in many and manifold different ways that are not always recognized for what they are. Everywhere around us, we can see increasing fragmentation in society. There's increasing pressures and demands on families, and it's becoming more and more difficult to stay oriented, find orientation, and also security, emotional and physical security. We found that the child is best supported when there is cohesion around the child and collaboration amongst the adults around the child. And therefore, in Compass Rose, we put the child in the center, surrounded by the warmth of the adults, the warmth of interest of the adults, which is generated, we find, by these three components. And this is how we work. So we offer conversation with parents, with Caroline, eurythmy therapy with the child, myself, and together we offer consultation and child therapy for the teachers. We're currently based in a Waldorf school in the southeast of England, in Kent. And we work as a freelance enterprise, and we have been very warmly received. We've been there now about 3 or 4 years, although of course there was a bit of a pause over lockdown. So Compass Rose, you might wonder what that means, what the name means. Just as we have on a watch, we have a dial, and we call then this the face of the watch. So on a compass, the face of the compass is called a rose. So it's a name for the dial on a nautical compass, and it's used for navigation. And of course, in the past, in former times, navigation was done by the stars. They plotted the stars. So this gives us a really good potent image for navigating family life while not losing sight of that bigger picture. So now I'm going to hand over to Caroline, and she's going to tell us more about how she works and what she does.
So, when we first meet with the families, we like to go to their home, both of us together, and it feels very important to have a full background and history of the family situation, and hearing about how the birth of the child has been, those early years of developmental stages, and any concerns and things that are causing distress in the family, that they then give us that picture of what they would like to address. And also to have a general feel for the daily life of the family. And then I will meet with the parents on a fortnightly basis, and Eve will meet with the child on a weekly basis doing eurythmy therapy. And I think what I found in the work with the parents is that there's various themes that interweave, and it can be personal, individual situations that a parent or parents may be struggling with. There may be the dynamics in the family, the different relationships where there's fragmentation, there's not the understanding, there's anxiety, stress, and also then the family unit. And what might be the leading gesture of the family, of that family unit. And again, I think this relates to the poem, of this sense of when something is restricted and held, or when something is loose and overstretched. So there's different modes and moods that can appear in the family. And as Eve alluded to, that there is also this, how things are in the society today, the pressures and stress, the rise in the use of technology, and certain demands that are made on the family that can cause in itself trauma and distress, that the parents feel they no longer quite know what to do. They can feel at a loss. And so through this work, it's about finding a way to navigate, to find that map. And each family has a different gesture. Each family is unique. And so it's working with the family and finding that way. And I would just like to read the poem once again so that we can just hear that. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes, and opens and closes. If it were always a fist, or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding. The two are beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. And so maybe we could just together take that experience of being contracted with our hands and being held and tight, and then allowing that movement to grow, and breathe out and come back. And once again, from that closed sense of allowing oneself to expand and to breathe in again. And once again, opening like a crocus flower that opens to the sun and bringing the warmth in. And one more time, opening. So we're just noticing and listening to our movement and allowing the warmth to come into our hearts. And as Verena beautifully brought to us earlier, this whole sense of how we move and how we breathe. And when we do this, we have the opportunity of how we listen. How am I listening to my movement? In which part of myself am I listening? That we become an organ of listening, a listening organ, a listening heart. And this is a very important area. It can be for ourselves, listening to ourselves, but when we come to work and listen to one another, can we have that quality of listening? And there is a somatic therapist, Peter Levine, who has worked with this for many, many years and done a lot of research and also written books of how the stress and trauma can be held in the body. And we can become stuck. And likewise, in our relationships with each other and within the family, things become stuck and certain patterns arise. And so working with the parents is that opportunity to look at maybe what areas, what situations have become stuck. Where does there need to be attention given? Can we widen our awareness? Can we recognize in our daily life, in the routines of the day, where changes can be made? And looking on a practical level, we then explore the routine of the day, the rhythms of the day, how meal times are, how bedtime, is it possible that there's calming activities before sleep so that the child can enter into sleep in a peaceful way? Hopefully the phone has been put to one side, the mobile phone or whatever things they have, that we begin to surround the child, taking care of their senses. And with this, we also then have connection to the school and with the teachers. And again, we will hear how the child is in the school situation and what support they might need. And so this quality of listening is something that I think we, for ourselves, is something can be beneficial as we become more aware of this. But in our interaction with each other, and through that listening, a space can grow that is held and cared for, and that growth and healing can come. So maybe, Theodore, if you could please put up the diagram, the pentagram diagram, and we could just have the lemniscate. So if we could just take a moment to look at this. And at the bottom, we have that area where it's the darker colors and that sense of stuckness, of held, where sometimes things feel absolutely impossible, or there's despair or hopelessness. But through working together and a growing awareness, through recognition and through wanting to change, one can follow that, so the movement can go either way, either to the right or to the left, so that we come to that middle crossing, which really is asking us to, with that awareness, that sense of consciousness, and where also we can feel quite vulnerable. But through that moving, we can come more into this lighter quality where change is possible. It may just be in a very small way, but something new can take place. But as we know with life, we find we come to a place of, yes, something has changed. And then a few days later, we're back, or we're maybe not back, but we're being challenged again. And so there is this movement, as much as we can come into movement, to allow change. And in the center of this crossing, if you like, this is what I would call the space between. The space where there's an opening to allow a breathing, to allow that new to come, and that holds the sun quality. Thank you. So the work we're doing is, if you like, not always seen in an obvious way, but there's a subtle aspect of allowing this breathing space and held. And when we do this together, we have somebody who is a witness. So we're not standing alone, but together we create that space. So now I'd like to pass back to Eve, and she will share with you more about working with children who experience stress, distress, and trauma. Thank you.
So, as we're now turning our attention to trauma in relationship to children, I'd like to set and place at the outset, the very outset, the picture of the journey of the soul of the child onto earth and into its earthly habitation, into its house, into its body. And this journey starts with a great deal of longing and a great will to venture onto this path to incarnation. And to my mind, nothing better depicts this journey than the painting by Raphael Santi called The Sistine Madonna, which I would like to have a quick look at, if we may. And first of all, just take a few moments, and then I'll say a few things. So this is a very beautiful picture, perhaps one you already know. And it shows us a mother holding her baby. Notice the light behind. She's bringing the child from the heavenly world, and she's stepping towards us. Perhaps, oh yes, just to say that the word incarnation comes from the Latin in English, and it literally means to inflesh. But of course, in English, we would say to embody, to become embodied. And so we can see that from this heavenly world down onto earth, the scene is set for a dramatic process to happen. And maybe, Ted, or we could look at the little, the next slide or picture, where we can see these round the edge, peeping from behind the curtain. You can see these faces of very obviously children's faces crowding round there, looking in on this scene that's happening, perhaps waiting their turn for incarnation too, to become embodied. Obviously full of interest, full of intent, and observing this archetypal happening of the painting. And now if we were to go back there, or please, to the first picture, and there at the bottom, you can see these two little cherubs. And they're quite plump, and they're quite chubby, and they're actually quite physical. And you could perhaps imagine that these are possibly the hereditary body, if you like, that's waiting for these souls, these disincarnate as yet souls, to come and join them. And they're looking a bit bored. They're having had a bit of a wait, really. So maybe that helps us understand why those two little cherubs are there, because I've always wondered, but it's a question. Maybe that's what that's about. And of course, there's been a great forgetting, really, a deep forgetting about this process of incarnating. Little awareness in modern day times, especially since the beginning of Christianity. There's really been a forgetting. Although having said that, in the last 20 years or so, there have been glimmers of a perception lighting up, and you can see there are films and novels now where this theme is present, is being touched, is being addressed. And also many stories of mothers or parents recounting their awareness and meetings with their unborn child. In English, we have a phrase which characterizes the dynamic of when two opposites meet. And we can feel here the opposite of this in-streaming soul with the body to incarnate. And we say the phrase is to think what might happen when an unstoppable force, when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. What a mighty activity that could be. And certainly it takes courage. Maybe sometime you might like to get some paper and crayons and draw that. See if you could find the dynamic of that, of this in-streaming of an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. So I'm spending a little time dwelling on this really awesome, dynamic, dramatic event. because I fear that sometimes in the rush to analyze and diagnose and label and talk to our children, we can forget this aspect, this bigger picture, that they are on a journey of incarnation. And in the allowing for it, in the allowing for that bigger perspective, we can actually find a source of help and guidance for our work with the children. Herbert Hahn, one of the first teachers in the first Waldorf school, said this, which I think is helpful. So that will be, Theodore, the next picture, please. Text. Remember that daily you are continuing the work of the spiritual world with the children. You are the preparers of the path for these young souls who wish to form their lives in these difficult times. And we might like to reflect on how difficult times are right now, even more so. The spiritual world will always stand by you in this task. This is the wellspring of the strength which you will need. Thank you. So, as we can imagine then, this mighty but difficult process, journey of incarnation, of embodiment, ideally needs to take place in a safe environment, warmed through by love and care. And of course, that doesn't always happen exactly as it should, and can be greatly affected by parents and the adults around, for better and for worse. And for some individuals also, it's easier than others to make this connection, to integrate the bodily substance with the incoming soul. For some individuals, it's easier than for others. Perhaps we could also add that in. But contemporary thinking and research backs this picture. In the last 20 years or so, there's been increasing interest in the concept of attachment. It was observed how mothers, in particular, responded to their infants, and how their how their behavior towards the infant gave the child a feeling of safety or not. And when the child was able to grow up feeling safe and feeling loved and warm, that gave the child stability, that gave the child resilience, so that even if it were to meet trauma in life, there would be more reserves, there would be more resilience to withstand the trauma, the ability to self-regulate. So here we have two key reciprocal components: the mother, the parents, the adults towards the child, and the child receiving the gesture of the parents, the imitation of the child. The child is exquisitely sensitive to facial expression, posture, and tone of voice, quality of movement. When a child is in sync with his caregiver, his sense of joy and connection is reflected in his actual physiology. So in his breathing, the pace of the heart, the steady heartbeat, and also the stress hormones, the level will be low. And here we have a beautiful picture, again by Raphael, really showing this, a picture of attachment. It's as simple as that. Perhaps we could have a look at that, Theodore, please. And there we can see this utter responsiveness of the mother to the child, and the child imitating, breathing in almost the mother, as epitomized by this beautiful veil. So a real picture of attachment, of attunement. connection. And so our whole environment can fundamentally influence and shape us as we grow up, for better and for worse. Thank you. So there's also research showing how rhythm affects development, how it helps a child to integrate the senses. We all instinctively know how rocking a child can soothe a child, how instinctively we speak in a kind of lulling voice. We go, there, it's all right. Yes, mother's here. We instinctively do this. We know this. So, of course, where there is trauma or disturbance, eurythmy therapy can be usefully employed, for it draws on just these elements, the elements of attunement, of rhythm, and imitation. And of course, more than that, it takes account of the bigger perspective, the picture of the incarnating soul. But while the gestures and movements of eurythmy are undertaken by the body, the immovable object, we could say, the origin of eurythmy comes from the invisible world, and it's highly attuned to the state of the unstoppable force. And so it can play a significant role in welcoming and helping the child into its new home, its body. And one can actually feel this very much from the children themselves when they're doing eurythmy. They instinctively trust it. They know it to be good. It can give a great feeling of settlement, of peace, of alignment. For instance, after working him particularly hard in one session, an 11-year-old, a cool guy, dealing with bereavement and ADHD tendencies, he sighed deeply and kind of flopped back in the chair and said, "Oh," he said, "that's magic." Because he intuitively knew that the eurythmy was meeting him somewhere deep down, meeting him where he wanted to be met and where he knew he was struggling. So at Compass Rose, we've worked with children with a variety of trauma. We've had children struggling with bereavement, with illness in the child or in the parent, or in the family, wider family. Children with autism, with adoption issues, IT dependency, anxiety, school phobia, or the divorce of parents, a whole variety. But fundamentally, the route to therapy is the integration of the experience with the body. And this is becoming an approach widely known now and recognized. One of the first books on this subject was published in 2014. It's quite well known, called The Body Keeps the Score, speaking about mind, brain, and body in the transformation of trauma. And this work is being increasingly taken up also by Peter Levine, who Caroline alluded to earlier. And this is really exciting stuff for eurythmists. So if we want to support a child who has trauma, a lot can be done, but very briefly, from the adult's point of view, we can bring more consciousness to our movements for a start. Because of course, with the child being highly imitative and really drinking in all that the adult is, not just says, all that the adult is and does, if we could draw attention to our surroundings and make beautiful movements around the child, or make the environment more beautiful, care for it. And then with this attunement, the child also feels that by caring for the environment, you're caring for them. And that can be very helpful. And that can be done in any circumstances. So bearing in mind this really absorbent nature of the child, the more we can do for ourselves to attune and align ourselves, the more we will help the children around us. And for that reason, the little bit of eurythmy I'd like to give here at the end is aimed at the adults. It's not something one would necessarily undertake with a child, but it's for us to bring us into alignment and balance. It's a little exercise. It speaks to the 3 dimensions of space, and that helps give us an anchor to embody and find a relationship between outside and inside. So if you'd like to join in, make yourself comfortable with your feet on the ground, but alert. Right. So we're just going to start, and Verena, Caroline have prepared this very beautifully. So we're going to start right here, taking our hands to this heart area, waiting until we feel a connection. And then when we're ready, we're just going to make a very gentle surrounding gesture, as if we're just surrounding something precious and holding it. And then releasing it. And again, forming it as if your hands around maybe a little light. And one more time. Something a bit bud-like. And from there, something begins to stir, begins to breathe. It's reaching out, almost like a little tendril, a little bit into the world, and then coming home. And now we're going to allow a little bit of warmth to ripen and bring it into fruition, into a certain sort of completion. And you can really land that gesture on your knee, on your lap, so you know you've arrived. You've landed. And we can do that one more time. And this time, thinking maybe of that wonderful cloak surrounding the baby, offering safety. But there's space there. There's also breath. And now we might like to think of how the mother steps forward and she gazes at us out of the picture. She makes connection. And of course, she's stepping down from the heaven onto the earth. We feel our feet too, right down. And one last time, in eurythmy, we call this gesture B. here comes M. And we can have more interactive interplay M. That's also possible. M. M. And our last gesture, we invite the warmth and we bring it through, right down. And this one we know as D. So, of course, in our work with Compass Rose, this doesn't work by itself. It's very much part of this holding of making a space around the child with all the adults, the parents, the teachers, and making a living space around the child in order that there can be a healing space and movement and growth through trauma. A bit of shuffling around, but I think we're happy to answer questions if we're able. Can't hear.
Elder, you are muted. Please unmute you.
Yeah, great. I'll put the questions forward. We have received already, and I invite those of you who have questions to write them in the chat. And please understand that we cannot do it voice-wise because translation would become too difficult how to organize it. So, and there are interesting questions. I start with the first one, which came in as far as I can see it. And you described that you work with parents, yeah? And include them into the work. And Galina is asking, can you also do this when the parents have already died?
Ah.
So it's an adult. So, yeah. You say they have to be included, but Galina asks, yeah, what does it mean if I'm an adult now?
As an adult.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. Absolutely, that one would be able to work with that kind of situation with somebody who wants to work through or acknowledge certain things that they experienced, maybe when they were in the family or with their parents. So that is something that certainly could be worked with. And it would be finding the right place and person or people to work with that, because each situation is individual and unique, but there would certainly be ways of working with that.
Thank you. You raised a lot of interest by your interpretation of the two little cherubs, angels at the bottom, yeah? And Ragnar, I don't know if Ragnar, if I spell your name correctly, even says they might have been added only after the original. And I was quickly checking Wikipedia if I can find something about it. And Wikipedia does not mention it. So for Wikipedia, it's part of the picture. So if you have more information, put it in the proceedings, and then we can look deeper into it. For the moment, your interpretation, these are the hereditary forces, yeah?
Well, I mean, one wonders. I'm aware that some people, there's speculation that the cherubs are put there afterwards, but even so, it's still significant that they are there on that painting. They're not there by chance.
No. And one question by Apine is how to work with those chubby little hereditary forces, especially if they sometimes bring with them certain diseases with which the infant will have to cope with during all his or her life.
Yes, yes. And that's why there would be a lot to say to that, but why really it needs this collaboration, this real sharing of that to really hold the situation so that the individual can make its best connection. And I think there'd be a lot to say about the whys and wherefores, but just humanly, that the more collaboration there is, the more the situation is surrounded with warmth and love, the most helpful it's going to be.
Yeah, when you say this, Babs writes that after World War II, not a lot of mothers were capable of mothering. They had no capacity to embrace the child. Yeah, the children coming forth of this are generally called the second generation, which is sort of secret because it would mean that 2/3 of Europe had a borderline disorder. How do you see this?
Every age has its different challenges. And each challenge, in a way, draws something out of us. If it can be worked with, it can help us take a step forward. It can help us find qualities and strengths that we wouldn't otherwise would have known that we have or could evolve.
Yeah, and I mean, this presents a huge challenge of, the effects of when things are hidden and intergenerational aspects that can work very, very deeply into families. And that's something certainly that we've noticed in our work, that it's how can we start to begin to look at that and have being that willingness in the right situation that can start to be addressed. But it's a very big situation that is not easy. It's very challenging.
Michelle asks, the last exercise, that was the BMD, Eve, you showed us probably, huh? Was for babies, if I understand well. What would you do of a similar quality for older children, 12-year-olds, for example?
Oh, well, you can still do BMD. I had a child recently, and he loved knights. So we did knights training, and you have a shield, and so one can find ways of bringing it in a suitable way for the age of the child. BMD is suitable for everybody, but I was also meaning that it needs to be done carefully, and so to do it for ourselves first, so we get a real sense for it, and then we carry that in us, albeit visibly, and the child can pick it up from us. And this can be done also with new parents for their baby.
Yeah.
I mean, often one would do this actually very large around a baby, not very small. One could also do that as a eurythmist.
And I also understood that you can do it for yourself. That
Yes.
was your example, because creating the surrounding, you said creating the surrounding is so important. You're not just working on the child, but you are creating surrounding, and you do these things, try to bring these things into the surroundings, huh? The way you yourself are, the way you arrange things.
Exactly.
And that was also an example for this, huh? Wasn't it?
Exactly, because the child absorbs everything from us.
Aikiko asks, can you share my experience? Yeah, do you agree that diagnosis may be given very quickly, you ADHD, autism, yeah? And then after more intensive exchange with the parents, evidence of trauma emerges. So first you say, it's this, it's that. And only when you look deeper, you discover trauma behind all these things. What do you think about this?
Yes. Well, of course, often it's very complex and things are overlaid. And I think sometimes there's a rush to diagnose something. But having said that, a diagnosis isn't always a bad thing, of course not, but that it can be very complex, and a diagnosis can be almost too simplistic. And of course, there can be trauma in the mix.
Yes, and when we're working in, maybe the child has been diagnosed, or they're hoping a child will be diagnosed, but it's really looking at these things are on a spectrum, and there may be tendencies, but then we might find that a child has tendencies, but we actually feel there's something else playing in there that is more significant or needs addressing, which might be to do with a trauma experience. So it's subtle. It's and to not always come too quickly with wanting to put that label there. We need to look at these things and take that on board, but what else might be working?
Great, thank you. Annette asks, is it possible to do eurythmy in silence for a family under great stress? The child's parents cannot speak to each other and only see the shadow of the other parent. Can you do something for them?
Could you say it again? When
Is it possible to do eurythmy in silence? That maybe this means secretly, yeah, for a family under great stress, yeah,
yes,
where the child's parents don't speak to each other anymore and only see the shadow of each other.
Yes, yes, I would say so, because one could feel how prayerful it can be, and because also, as we said, the eurythmy is speaking to something a bit bigger, that then it has a resonance in that bigger field, let's say, and where there's been a connection with somebody else, why shouldn't they pick that up as well?
And maybe I could just add in here that we mentioned that we also work with the school and the teachers, and one thing that we do with them is a child study. And that gives the opportunity, if there's a child or a family who is struggling, that the community of the school and we join, and any other therapists, and we will have 2 or 3 meetings about the child and the situation, but from that bigger picture as well. And through doing that, and we work with observation, we will observe the child for a week beforehand. There's a certain working also using pictures, our imagination, the way we listen to each other. And through that, if you like, there's a resonating, a vibrating, if you like, of an energy, and it is sometimes amazing what will then change for that child through doing that activity without actually saying anything to the child. This is what is around. So undoubtedly one can work in this way.
More and more questions coming in. I pick another two. One, I'm not sure if I understand everything, so I only bring the first part of the question because this is quite clear, and I'm very curious what you want to have to say about it. Are there signs of trauma for children in same-sex families?
Well, as much as there would be in another.
If you have two men as parents or two women as parents?
Not necessarily. I would say in as much as it would be in any other family.
Yeah, it depends what is being presented within that family unit.
And someone has written, it seems that you speak out of experience, so that's great. And Anne-Marie, no, can you give an example, Marina, of how to work with a teenager? Yeah, an example where you started, how you progressed. What do you do with a teenager? Which is a difficult situation anyway, and there's a traumatic background.
Yeah.
So how do you start and how do you achieve success?
It'll depend very much on what the situation is, you know. So if one takes it that one's meeting with the parents, then again, it will be listening to what are the family dynamics, what is the history, what is the connections, have there been certain significant trauma experiences, how have the developmental stages been, how was birth? How was the child when they were very, very young? Because often you can get a, if you like, almost a mirroring into the teenage years. And what illnesses have they had? How were the illnesses, you know, the childhood illnesses? So there's many things to look at. And again, it's about building this warmth body around the young person through our listening capacity. It's not so much always what we're saying, though that is important too. Who is significant in the child, in the young person's life? Who do they have for support? Who can they talk to? Might not.
So you say in a way, you have a pot and you put different vegetables, yeah, in this pot, but afterwards you need warmth to really cook it and make a meal of it. Yeah, and this warmth
Certainly need
a lot to do with the relationship and the honor you give this person and the freedom you create.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
That's the warmth and the periphery, which is needed again.
Yes.
And I think from the eurythmy point of view, I mean, a lot is revealed through the movement itself. So one would work with the young person and see what they are telling you through their movements, and then go there. And also find out who they are, be interested in them, and then work out of that.
Who is this emerging person? What are they asking of us? What can I learn from my time when I was a teenager? How was I at that time? What did it feel like?
I think to be adaptive as well. When we have certain things that we know are kind of good for teenagers, and of course keep them in the mix, but then to really meet the young person and see really what it is they need, not a prescription, not well, we do this when you're 14 and that when you're 15, but really in a therapeutic way assess what it is they really are desiring to meet
and to become.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Eve. It's great to listening to you. It's great to be allowed to look behind the scenery a little bit and feeling what kind of work you are doing and how important it is to help each other to make our steps forward.